Alright, let us begin with Jarrett chapter 9. As you can see on the screen, chapter 9 is entitled America in World War I. Now, as we have discussed, World War I began in 1914 and ended in 1918. That would be November 11th, 18 when the armistice was signed. And we referred to that day as Armistice Day for decades, and then sometime after World War II, we changed it from Armistice Day to Veterans Day to acknowledge all individuals, men and women, who had fought and served in America's forces. But prior to that, it was known as Armistice Day to recognize those who fought and served during World War I. Now, we, the United States, did not enter into World War I until 1917. Which would be April of 1917, just a few months, actually probably a few weeks after Woodrow Wilson was inaugurated for a second term. And as we have discussed, Wilson ran on a platform in 1916 of he kept us out of war. So we entered the war in 1918, just really about a year and a half, give or take a few weeks, prior to the end of the war. Our infusion of manpower, weaponry, enthusiasm helped turn the war in the tide of the Allies, in favor of the Allies. Anyway, let us begin. Let's go to our first slide. This is really more of an introduction to the chapter, a little bit of a back look as well. So once again, America, World War I is our title. Since the War of 1812, American leaders had successfully followed Lincoln's advice during his farewell address to avoid foreign entanglements. Now, Washington gave his farewell address before he left the White House, and for, 120-ish years, we follow that pretty much. Now, there were a couple times when we did not, the War of 1812 being one of them. The Mexican-American War, which was fought in 1848, was a second one. And then finally, of course, you have the Spanish-American War, which is mentioned right there, which was in 1898. Really, those three, and there are a few other minor ones, but really those three are the biggest examples of America becoming involved in overseas entanglements. Now, the War of 1812, we felt that we were required to. English had been stopping American shipping, seizing American sailors, pressing them into the British Navy. That, of course, goes against our belief in freedom of the seas. The Mexican-American War, which is something we don't cover in this year. That is an 8th grade history event, something you should have studied when you're in 8th grade. The Mexican-American War was about America annexing Texas, and there's some boundary disputes, and it was a relatively short-lived war, not major in terms of a lot of land gained or loss of life. Of course, there was some loss of life. Thousands of soldiers on both sides died. But in terms of major victories, memorable victories, no. But it did solidify our hold on the southwestern part of the United States, Texas through California, huge thing. Then, of course, the Spanish-American War, which gained us all the territories, which we discussed in previous chapters. But aside from that, America really kind of did what Washington had asked. He suggested, he warned us to stay out of foreign powers' problems, stay out of those entanglements. And because of the Spanish-American War, America became an overseas empire, became a major world power, and we had to change our policies a little bit. We had to adjust, adapt to the changing times. And really, it's not till after World War II, in 1945, when we drop all pretext of neutrality, and we really become sort of the world's policeman for a while. But we attempt to stay out of foreign engagements. We attempt to stay out of European problems as long as we could. And unfortunately for us, 1917, because of a number of events that we're going to discuss, and we've discussed them a little bit already, we were just compelled to enter the war. So American neutrality goes all the way back to George Washington, with the exception of a couple examples. We stayed neutral, stayed out of European problems as much as possible. Okay, let's move on to our next slide. And we're going to take a look at section 1 today, or with at least in this presentation. The first section of the Jarrett book, Causes of the War in Europe. Now, again, we know the 4 causes are the 4 we discussed in a previous video: militarism, imperialism, nationalism, and the alliance system. Those are the 4 causes. Now, this is a term, cause, that is used by the book. It's probably not the right term, but we'll use it. There were several events that sparked the war. They're not really the causes. Well, again, you could argue that this is part of imperialism. But let's look at this first one, the spark that ignited World War I. Now, the Archduke Franz Ferdinand was a member of the Austrian royal family. Austria was a monarchy, and the Archduke was in line for the throne. And Austria had, as it says right here, Austria-Hungary was then a large multinational state. It had a number of provinces, a number of territories. There were some Slavic groups, and the Slavic people would be those in what would be Eastern Europe today. The Czechoslovakians, what were the Poles from Poland, Yugoslavians when it was still a country, and the Slavic groups within those areas felt that the Austrians and others had been infringing upon their rights. So, the Archduke Franz Ferdinand was a member of the royal family of Austria. It was a plan put together by the Austrians that he and other of the royal family would tour, would go look at some of the places that they controlled in an attempt to solidify their hold over them. Okay, as it states down here, the Archduke, as I already told you, was an heir to the throne of Austria-Hungary. Okay, now what was going on is that there were some officials in Serbia. Serbia is a smaller country that borders Austria. Was secretly planning the assassination of the Archduke. The idea was if they could kill the Archduke, then they, the Serbians and other Slavic groups, could send a message to the Austrians that they are not to mess with us. So, the Archduke Franz Ferdinand was targeted by Serbians in 1914 for assassination. They had specially recruited terrorists to assassinate him. A group known as the Black Hand. Let me move some of this out of the way here. There we go. A group known as the Black Hand was planning to assassinate the Archduke. A man by the name of Gabriel Princip was the leader of the Black Hand. Okay, so here we have the Archduke. He is on a tour of Serbia, part of his duties as a member of the royal family of Austria, and there is an assassination attempt. Now, the attempt itself was kind of strange. Princip and several other members of the Black Hand waited for the Archduke's motorcade. As it came by, they threw a hand grenade at it. The hand grenade hit the car, kind of bounced away, exploded, injuring a couple of guards who were assigned to protect the Archduke and his party, including his wife Sophia. The Archduke and his wife and the rest of the gang continues on to their destination, fulfills whatever duties they had at that time. The injured men were taken to a local hospital. At the end of the tour, the end of his duties, he wanted to go see the men who had been injured, and so his driver took him. The driver kind of got lost, went down a dead-end street. As he was backing up, trying to make his way out of the dead-end street, who happens to walk by? But Gabriel Princip. Princip sees the Archduke, his target, runs toward him with a pistol, starts shooting, and shoots and kills both the Archduke and his wife, Sophia. Alright, I am back. I know you didn't notice I left, but My wife came into the room. I'm at home over the holidays and making this, and she came in and wanted to talk to me. So, anyway, I kind of forgot where I was. I'm pretty sure I finished up with the story about the Archduke and his wife being killed. So we're going to move on from that. Anyway, so we're now at the point where the Archduke has been killed. Austria, and again, keep in mind he was a member of the Austrian royal family, gave Serbia an ultimatum, and they basically said, you will either give us the people responsible for the death of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand or else. And when Serbia said no, then the Austrians, or else, they invaded Serbia to avenge the assassination. Again, this is where the alliance system sort of kicks in. The Austrians, were encouraged by their buddies, their allies, the Germans, to do this, to push Serbia. And you got to keep in mind, we talked about the alliance system, I'm sure we will again. The Austrians, the Germans, and the Ottomans, part of the Turkish Empire, were all desirous of gaining more land, more resources, more markets. And so Germany, which is probably the most belligerent of all of these groups, were really pushing the Austrians because they had some ideas of their own, and they figured once Austria took over Serbia, that would sort of open the door for them to move into other areas that they had desires upon. Anyway, to get back to this, so existing alliances, and again we talked about this system the other day, soon brought many other major powers into the war. Russia, which was allied with the Serbian country, came to their defense against Austria. Germany was allied to Austria, and they came to their defense. The English and the French were allied to the Russians, and on and on and on. So essentially, Austria invades Serbia. Russia joins on the side of Serbia. Germany joins on the side of Austria. England and France joins on the side of Serbia and Russia. And what probably would have been a relatively minor, and I think this is a key point here, what probably would have been a relatively minor issue, the death of the Archduke. Now again, this is a big deal for him, I'm sure, but what probably would have been a very minor regional issue quickly escalates into a major European war. And again, we have a number of European and Asian, Russia is part of Asia, we have a number of a number of Asian and European powers at war, but it's still relatively contained. We are not involved, and you don't really have anyone else besides that group already mentioned. So how did this escalate? Well, again, you got to go back to the four causes: militarism, imperialism, nationalism, and the alliance system. So what should have been let me clean this up a little bit again and make this point again. What should have been a very minor regional crisis quickly escalated because of the alliance system into a major European war. And again, that's part of the problem. It's a European war. We had tried to stay out of European problems for decades. George Washington warned us about this. We had stayed really away from them for, as I said earlier, decades, with the exception, of course, of the Spanish-American War and the Mexican War and the War of 1812. But we had tried to stay out of European affairs as much as possible because, again, we felt that it was not our concern. But it didn't work out that way. The generals on both sides felt that they would be able to obtain a quick victory, and they were hoping for a quick victory before their enemies could get their forces into action. And it didn't really work out that way. Now, a new kind of war. We have talked about some of the new weapons. We're going to look at them again. I think we have the rest of this slide, and one more slide, and we'll be done with the first section. As I said earlier, many leaders hoped for a very quick end to the war. To avoid a two-front war, keep in mind Germany, and we'll take a look at some maps if we haven't already. Germany is sort of in the middle of Europe. To its east on the map, you have Russia. To the west and to the south, you have the Brits and the French. And so Germany is kind of surrounded. And so to avoid that two-front war, which means your troops are divided, fighting on two separate sides in the east and the west, Germany, their war plans called for their army to march through neutral, here again, neutral Belgium. And the Belgiumese were and have always been neutral. And so the Germans were going to send their troops through Belgium so they could take Paris and take control of France before Russia could enter the war. Russia is a large country. You've seen them on maps. They have a large population, but it's relatively spread out. And in order to get the soldiers up and running, to get their troops moving toward the front that they would be fighting against the Germans, it would take some time. They would have to get their soldiers trained, moved, properly equipped, in some cases even raise another army. Probably, I don't remember the numbers of the military that Russia had in uniform prior to the war, but it was relatively small. So they would have to raise an army. In order to do that, they would need time. And so that's what Germany was hoping for, time that they could then take France before the Russians could enter the war. The Germans advanced across Belgium into France, but they were stopped before they could reach Paris, which again, if you take Paris, which is the capital of France, then you pretty much control the country. So what they had hoped to achieve didn't happen. Now, why? Well, there's a couple of reasons why. Some of the new weapons are the reason why. We want to talk about the biggest reason in a moment, which is trench warfare. But before we get to that, machine guns, poison gas, submarines, airplanes, these are all weapons that had been used in one way or another prior to this, but never to this extent, never to this effectiveness before. These weapons were mass killers. These weapons made it easier to defend positions rather than to attack. You can sit back with your machine guns and hold the position. You can use your air power to hold the position, in some cases more easily than to attack. Soldiers dug, thousands of miles of fortified trenches. And we've talked a little bit about trench warfare already. These trenches extended hundreds of miles along the eastern French-German border, which is often referred to as the Western Front. Now again, that's just there. There were trenches dug all throughout France and other countries, probably thousands of miles at one time or another. And so these trenches were dug by millions of men. In some cases, they were concrete, steel reinforced. Many of them were 5-6 feet deep, 4 or 5 feet across. In some cases, there were tunnels connecting them to other trenches, or trenches connecting to other trenches. There were dugout areas where the men could sleep or store munitions, or officers could hold meetings. These were fairly elaborate. Trench warfare on the Western Front, and the term Western Front is used to indicate the area between France and Germany, was again covered, which is the wrong word to use, but there were hundreds of miles along the French-German border of these trenches. And in many cases, as I said before, these are fairly elaborate. In some cases, they were just quick holes dug in the ground. Okay, trench warfare was a new, strange form of warfare that the world had never really seen. Now again, had we ever dug trenches before? Yeah, someone had before, I'm sure, in warfare. But nothing as elaborate, nothing as widely as established as what we see here. Okay, these trenches were separated by fields of barbed wire and mines known as no man's land. And we'll see some images, if we haven't already, some images of no man's land, some pictures, some video of that in the trenches as well. So anyone who climbed out of the trenches would often face instant death from the enemy machine gun fire, or if they were able to get out of the trench into no man's land, oftentimes those were mined by the enemy, and one of those landmines you step on, small explosive, probably enough to kill you, if not enough to blow off a foot, a leg, and so without medical help, you would probably die relatively quickly. So that area between the trenches, no man's land, was often bombed out, burned out land that maybe at one time had been rich forest or rich fields growing any number of crops, but now, because of all the death, the destruction, the bombing, the fires, no man's land kind of looked like the face of the moon. Soldiers would spend years in the trenches, many times for months at a time, nonstop. They would be facing shelling from enemy artillery fire for hours and hours. Let me clean this up a little bit. Okay, so you're in a trench. Again, you may be in the same trench or going back and forth from trench to trench for months at a time before you get any kind of relief, time to go back behind the lines to rest, recuperate, whatever the case may be. And so once you left the trenches, you had enemy machine gun fire, you had barbed wire, you had landmines in no man's land. Oftentimes you'd be facing shelling from enemy artillery fire for hours every day for days upon never end. And since neither side could advance, the fighting became quite stationary. And we've gone over prior to this, we're talking about the vocabulary terms, how the trench would work. Again, going from one trench to another. Let me just touch on that again quite quickly, because this is fun. Trench, trench. Let me use a different color. Those are trenches back to trenches behind there. All of this in the middle, no man's land. Okay, and there you could have these landmines, and we'll use this color right here for barbed wire. Okay, you had the soldiers here and these trenches. You had soldiers in these trenches, and at a given order, this group, and we'll use this group right here, would advance. Now, if they could, and they had enough bodies, they would overrun this position, take that trench. Once that occurs, now, again, we'll just use this side over here as the Germans, and these are the Americans. Go fight, win America. Once that is done, now the Germans control this trench, okay? The Germans control this trench. Well, what happens when the Americans attack, counterattack from a trench way over here, which we don't really have shown? So we got another trench over here, and the Americans counterattack. Boom. And they now control this trench. Well, then the Germans counterattack, and they go back this way. Let's use a different color because I think the Germans deserve a different color. And now the Germans, who are over here, they counterattack. Well, you get the idea. And we can go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth for days, weeks at a time, always fighting for the same piece of ground. All right, this will be our last slide. Soldiers sometimes faced attacks with poison gas. Every soldier in the front line was issued a gas mask and the apparel to fight it off. Now, the most common poison gas was used was referred to as mustard gas because of its yellowish tint. If you got it on the skin, it could irritate it. If you got enough, it could burn it, and you get second, third degree burns. If you got it in your eyes, it could, again, small amounts could make your eyes water, impact your vision. You got enough, it could blind you. If you breathed in enough of it, it could kill you. Literally, it would eat your lungs and you would drown in your own fluids. It doesn't sound pleasant, and it wasn't. Because of the lethalness whatever it is, how deadly the gas was, the casualty rates were extremely high. Tanks also were a problem, and they were first used in World War I in combat situations. Now, again, they were still relatively primitive to be truly effective, but if I'm a soldier on the ground and you're in a tank, you're probably going to win. Because while the trenches, tanks were not overly effective weapon in that type of warfare, but they still had a lot of power behind them. They had the armor plating. They did have the machine guns in them. They also had rockets or artillery they could fire. So again, they could be dangerous, but they were really still too primitive to be overly effective. But they did have a purpose, and they could kill a lot of people. Airplanes, for the first time, were used in combat. Now, again, airplanes were not very old. They were only about 11 years old when the war first began. And at first, airplanes were used mostly for reconnaissance, to spy upon the enemy, see what they were doing. But soon they took up weapons, bombs that they would drop, or then machine guns, and they became quite a deadly weapon. So the first airplanes were used to see what was going on across enemy lines. That's the reconnaissance. And then they were used for offensive weapons. And of course, some of the air battles, the dogfights in the sky between Baron von Richthofen and the Red Baron, the most decorated pilot of all time with the most kills. He was credited with 80 kills. Eddie Rickenbacker, the American ace of aces, I think he was credited with around 40 kills. Though again, our power was quite deadly and could be used effectively, it really wasn't enough to win the war. So, tanks, not overly effective. Airplanes, again, could be deadly, but not really enough to win the war. German U-boats, we've talked about the U-boats previously. Again, very effective. Couldn't win the war. They could starve your enemy out, perhaps, or at least slow down the flow of weapons, goods, and other supplies to your enemy. But again, they're not going to win the war. So even though U-boats were used to attack large ships, and they were quite effective, they were very effective, they weren't going to win the war. So the tanks, the airplanes, the poison gas, the U-boats were effective. They killed lots of people, prolonged the war, but you're not going to win the war like that. You need boots on the ground. And that takes us back to the trench warfare. I'm going to get back to and finish up our look at U-boats. When a battleship sank another ship, it rescued survivors, or the law of the sea. When submarines attacked another ship, because of their size, they lacked the room to take in those who survived the attack. So essentially, those who had survived were going to die anyway, unless a friend, an ally ship can come by and save them. The Lusitania, for example, which a German U-boat sank, had about 1,200 dead. Part of that was due to the initial attack. The torpedoes blew up, killing people, true indeed. But when the ship went down, there were people in the water. And since the North Atlantic is notoriously unmerciful, put it that way, the water is often during the year cold, extremely cold. And of course, if you're in the water for any given amount of time, hypothermia can set in and you die, or sharks, or you drown. So submarines were extremely feared because of that fact. They could attack without warning, and if you went into the water after a submarine attack, your chances of being rescued were almost non-existent. Now, let's continue. Britain placed a blockade around Germany and Austria-Hungary in an attempt to starve them into submission. Again, nothing new with that. Every war has seen some type of blockade. Russia became cut off from the West. Again, keep in mind, Russia is a large country, a large population, but because it is so large, its people are spread out. And to be perfectly honest, the Russian economy wasn't very strong going into the war. And Russia lacked ammunition and the supplies it needed to continue to fight the war. Each side tried to mobilize all of its resources, turning the conflict into a total war, turning their entire economies toward victory. And they did that through any number of means. They did it with certain weapons like poison gas. airplanes, U-boats, and tanks. Sorry, forgot tanks there. But, again, this is a big but, all countries use these weapons to defeat their enemy, which is part of that total war belief, okay? But the big problem was, and always will be in a war, ammunition and supplies, mostly supplies. The country that, or the side that can resupply itself, usually is the victor. Okay, now that concludes Section 1. As you can see, Section 2, America Intervenes, will be in our next video, which we will take up probably tomorrow. And thank you. Bye. I got to work up a better way to finish this. It is not good enough. I'll come up with one. Anyway, bye.